Hello guys and welcome back to another Strategoi video. A quick intro before we start with the actual video. When we recorded this, everything was sounding just fine, but when we finished the recording, both of my guests' voice sounded a little bit robotic, so I had to do some adjustments on the audio, which turned down the volume of my voice, but also took away some of the robotic qualities of theirs. So apologies for the inconvenience, we'll make sure it's not a problem next time. I hope you still enjoy it though. Let's get started. Hello everyone and welcome back to another Strategoi video. This week we're doing something really special today because we're talking about a tournament with two guests, Ryan and Nick. You've heard Ryan before if you've watched the Untitled Chapter video I did, but Nick is a new guest on the channel. We're going to talk about our lists, about the tournament experience as a whole, and Nick and Ryan will also share some of their tactics and matchups with you guys. So welcome Ryan and Nick. Really grateful that you guys want to spend your time talking about Warhammer with me.
Yeah, for sure, always.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, so maybe before we start, like a quick intro from both of you guys, what armies you play, and everything you like to mention.
Nick, why don't you go first?
Sure. So as you said, I'm Nick. My typical armies that I'm playing I range between Sylvaneth. They're a bit on the shelf for now until the new book comes out, hopefully. I dabble quite a bit in Ironjaws, and then what I'm trying to focus on now is making Flesh-Eater Courts work.
Cool. And I would say you've been actually pretty successful at that mission.
Yeah, I agree.
So far, so good.
Yeah, Ryan?
Yeah.
In addition to playing Idoneth, I generally play all Order armies except Dirty Seraphon with all their dirty tricks. But my main focus is cities, and that's kind of the center point of why I play so many Order armies, because as everyone's probably aware, you can bring in a good chunk of them as coalition. And so as you'll see, little foreshadowing here from my list, I very much like messing around with bringing in those coalition units and giving them the city's keywords and stuff. It's really fun.
Yeah, by the way, Ryan, before I forget to ask, the viewers have been asking about a guide on Idoneth allies for Lumineth. So I'll have to pin you down for that one because you are the expert when it comes to allies in my eyes.
I do love thinking about how to work in allies as much as possible, so that would be fun.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Let's dive right in. So we went to the Legion's 6 tournament organized by the Damnation crew in Antwerp. In this video, we'll first talk about the overall tournament review, so the amount of players, the missions we played. Then we'll look at the 3 army lists, and we'll talk about the matchups we faced. Then we'll conclude with some final thoughts. So let's start off with the tournament review. So for the tournament pack for the Legion 6 tournament, there were only 18 players, but that was fine for me. It was 3 games. You had 3 hours for each game, and you had to play at least 3 rounds. Did you guys manage to finish all your games within those 3 hours, or did you have to math it out at the end?
No, I think for all 3 of my games, they were well within the time frame.
Yeah, I feel like most of my games, we at least... my second game, I know that we stopped after 4 and just I don't think we projected after that. 5, I think we did... Or my last game, I think we did all the way through. Jonas, did you and I end up playing all the way through?
I think so. I think I played... both of the games I played against you guys, I think went to turn 5. But my list was also kind of a 5-turn list to get the most value out of it, to be fair. It wasn't really a burst damage list, was more of a grind, I think. Yeah. But I do think I played all my games to the end. The second game was noticeably shorter, which we will talk about later. I think the 3 hours was good. As for missions, we played Feral Foray in the first game, then Savage Gains, and then Power Struggle. I've noticed from other tournaments that these 3 missions are kind of staples in the tournament scene right now.
Definitely. Especially Feral Foray and Savage Gains. You see them in pretty much, especially 5-game tournaments, they're both usually there.
Yeah. Is there one of these missions that you guys particularly like or maybe even dislike?
I am a huge fan of Savage Gains, honestly, especially
Really?
with my list, which we'll get into. I have high mobility and some pretty good peel mechanics, so I'm able to get people off of objectives and get behind you. So for Savage Gains, I'm really able to really play a different style and keep people moving and on their feet. So I really enjoy that one.
That's funny because I was about to say I don't like Savage Gains.
Yeah, same.
I think Savage Gains and Power Struggle. I mean, I think they're fair, but both of those, I tend to play elite armies with low body counts, and I find it hard to hold multiple objectives at the same time. So Savage Gains is one of those really swingy, like you can get max 9 VP in one turn with your battle tactic, I believe. Or no, is it with just objectives? It's 4.
Yeah,
no,
I think it's 11, right?
Yeah, 11 with the
crazy.
And that can get swingy. And then Power Struggle is the one where you have to hold it for 2 consecutive turns, which again can be very difficult if you don't have a lot of bodies. Playing against Nurgle with either one of those can be very much an uphill battle for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with both of you to some extent. Like, I understand why Nick likes Savage Gains, and I also understand why you dislike it, Ryan. And that's the same for me personally. I play elite armies, and especially with my lists, I ran 3 screens, but they died so quickly that I didn't really have enough units to, maneuver on the field and claim objects, even though I had a teleport. So it was really tough going for me in Savage Games. But what I also don't like is if you get overwhelmed in Savage Games by turn 3, for example, and you've lost almost the entirety of your army, then the other 2 turns are just basically free points for your opponent, and that's a lot of free points.
Exactly.
And to be fair, it mattered a lot, I think, in my rankings, and maybe even in yours as well, Nick. When I played against the full dragon list in my round 2, my army was almost annihilated by the end of round 3. So he had 2 rounds of full scoring where he could build an advantage of 20 points on me. It was ridiculous.
I think it really is resource management critical. So if you're getting peeled off by shooting or things like that, you're gonna have a really difficult time, like you guys are mentioning. I think why I enjoy it so much is that I have options to bring things on the table that weren't there, and then also bringing things back. So I'm hopefully never fully resource depleted, so I can have options as well a lot of the times and put different sort of threats around the board. So for me, it's a little bit easier to manage that steamroll.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. And you are also so good at managing those resources, to be fair. Like, when I started our game, I was for sure thinking the advantage is for me here. Like, the Lumineth have such a huge advantage over Flesh-Eater Court, but you played that game so well. We'll talk about that later, but I was really impressed by it. So I can imagine that you can get a lot of value from Savage Games with your kind of play style. Okay, and then for scoring, you got some basic points already if you delivered your list in time and had your entire army painted. But then the way they scored during the tournament, I quite liked. So you got more points depending on the difference in victory points, right? So you got some points for winning a major victory and a little bit less for a minor victory, but mainly you scored points if you won by a lot from your opponent. And if you played a very tight game, you wouldn't be winning as convincingly. And I really like that system.
Yeah, I've got problems with it personally because you can go 2-1 at a tournament like this. I didn't, but you can go 2-1 at a tournament like this and still place in the bottom half of the rankings. So if you take a list that's like more of a middle tier list and you earn all of your wins, but they're just always, kind of scraping by, you're going to have a really hard time being competitive. You kind of have to have a really all or nothing kind of list in order to make the most of this type of scoring system. But even if we were to keep it, the problem, as we were talking about with Savage Gains and some of the other ones sometimes, is that not all battle plans tend to generate as many VP. So Savage Gains has quite a large range of possible VP outcomes by the end of the game. And so obviously the points difference is not going to be balanced enough compared to other ones. So you could do an easy standardization where we normalize everything so that it's relative to what the potential is, or something like that, where power struggle ends up, winning by, I don't know, 5 points in power struggle is the same as winning by 10 points on Savage Gains or something like that. And you could do some basic math on that stuff, and I think make it a little bit more fair across the battle plans.
Yeah, I agree. I think Savage Gains was a bit out of place if you look at how the scoring was how the score was calculated. I mean, maybe the organizers had a system that we don't know of. That's possible, of course. But yeah, I agree. Savage Games is kind of a swinging experience when it comes to scoring and ranking. Also, like this scoring system, I really like it. And I think it gets more value if you play more games.
Yeah. I think it's worth noting that we're friends with the tournament organizers.
Yeah.
So this isn't a knock against them. This differential system is a common thing we see at tournaments. I just wish there are some other solutions out there, and I think on Warhammer Weekly a couple weeks ago with this guy from California, they were talking about, he was British but lives in California. They were talking about a different way of using the point system. So I would like to see things shift away from a non-normalized points differential system. But this is nothing against what Nick and I can both attest to this tournament being one of our favorite tournaments we've ever been to. So
yeah, absolutely. And then I think one of the other things to add in here that I really enjoyed, which was new for me, was they actually had in their rules pack that the game had to go at least 3 rounds. And if you tabled or won your opponent in the first 2, you would only get a minor victory, which I thought was pretty fun to keep in the atmosphere or the theme of the tournament, that it wasn't super power gamey. So for me, I thought that was a really interesting change that I've never actually seen.
Yeah, I agree. I think it was a very beginner-friendly tournament. Also, just the mindset of the organizers and the people that showed up. We will discuss it in a later slide, but there was a really chill and friendly atmosphere, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, let's look at the point. Oh, right. So here's the point difference system. I forgot I put this in. I was like, I can't forget this. I can't forget this. And of course I do. So yeah, here, if you're interested and if you're thinking about scoring, this is how it was calculated. You also got 5 points for a major win and 2 for a minor win, I think. And then we also received 10 points if we delivered our list on time, and 10 points if our army was completely painted.
Yeah.
So yeah, there is that. I think the maximum amount of points scored was 120 by the guy that steamrolled both of us, Nick.
Yeah.
And then the lowest was 58. So you were in the upper bracket of those points, and I think me and Ryan were like bottom middle tier there. But yeah, let's look at the meta. And with meta, I mean what lists were present and what was the type of army you would probably face there. So I think, as we mentioned before, there was a mix of seasoned and new players. I was amongst the newer ones, and you guys were more amongst the seasoned ones, I think, even though there were even more seasoned players than you guys, because there were 3 or even 4 members of the national Belgian team present there.
Right.
From the army's point of view, I felt there was a lot of Stormcast, but actually there were only 3 lists. But I think maybe because Ryan also brought the dragons, that gave a bit of a Stormcasty feel. And
yeah.
then you had the Soulblight and Nurgle. You see those guys a lot in the top brackets as well. But 2 Lumineth Realm-Lord lists out of the 18. I thought that was kind of original because you don't see them as much anymore.
Yeah, well, and also maybe it's foreshadowing too much, but I also added to that mix.
That is also true, yeah. You basically dipped your toe into 3 armies.
Yeah.
Yeah. But overall, I think it was a very healthy mix, right? There wasn't really one kind of matchup you could prepare for, I would say. Though I think it was, if you would prepare for something, it probably would have been dragons, right?
Yeah, so I had to pay my dues this time around, because the last GT I went to, there was over 50% of the players playing dragons, and I missed every single game against dragons.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I was shocked by that. I had to play against Nurgle twice, but not too bad. So this one, they made me pay for. I started out playing against a full dragon list and with long strikes as well. So that really shook me to my core of how that works.
Yeah.
But after that, yeah, it seemed pretty well balanced. I thought there were some interesting lists that you don't typically see as common, so I thought it was a good, healthy mix-up as well.
Yeah, exactly. And there were some typical meta lists like the Control Legion of the First Prince list, Morathine the Bow Snakes, a lot of Storm Drakes. But other than that, like most of it felt kind of original, or at least casual or competitive enough, but with a twist. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, I would definitely say that it was competitive with a twist. So, like, you saw some Ironjaws, but it wasn't your typical Ironjaw list. Being the typical Ironjaw player, that was what I was attracted to. And then when I was looking at what he brought, I was like, huh, that's interesting. It's a little bit different, but and then the same thing. I think the Legion did it have horrors? I can't remember if it was all Plague Bearers though. So trying not to give up those extra VPs. I can't remember.
I don't think there were a lot of horrors in there. If there were, it was definitely only just one unit. But yeah, you had to package of 5 heroes, right? Like Kairos, the Khorne Demon Prince, all that kind of jazz.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Ryan, you want to add anything to this, or?
No, I feel like surprisingly the Bow Snakes player, I know him as well. I think he only placed 10th out of 18.
Yeah.
So I feel like and he's a really good player. Like he's on the Belgian team if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he is.
So I kind of feel like maybe that list has had its time in the sun. I don't know. Maybe he just had a bad day or bad matchups. But yeah, him placing 10th is not typical.
Yeah,
so
it might have something to do with the scoring as well. If he did sort of well in the first rounds, and then he had to play like two difficult opponents afterwards, that could have been a reason why he was placed lower, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let's move on to our personal experience and the overall experience. So overall, we kind of discussed this already. I think there was a friendly and somewhat casual vibe there, at least for most of the players there. It wasn't really a win at all cost mentality. There was some of it though, because obviously if you're playing in the Belgian team and you're preparing for Worlds and you're getting as much practice in as you can, then obviously you're bringing your A game, right, and your best list. And
yeah.
Yeah, I think both me and Nick got the short end of the stick.
Yes, but I will say something about that list once we get to it. Was though it was quote unquote the list, I still had a good time playing against it. I mean, it wasn't fun getting my teeth kicked in, but it was a good learning experience to try and counter some things and also to stress test my own list. And playing against Paul was not like unenjoyable. I had a good time, and he was really supportive of like, oh, I was actually pretty worried about your list, and these are some strengths-giving pointers. And I mean, Paul is a way better player than I am, so it was really good to get some feedback from him on what I could have done better. So ultimately, even against those super win-at-all-cost lists, I still had a good time.
Oh yeah, I agree completely. Like I played him the second game, and it was exactly the same experience as you had. I think I already knew I was going to get steamrolled. But, at some point there was this chance that I could get a double turn, and my 20 Wardens were in a really good position to strike like in the heart of his army. And he was genuinely worried, and I was genuinely like, oh wow, I might actually make this a close game. But then I didn't get a double turn, so there's that.
Dreaded double turn.
Yeah. Do you guys want to share anything about your personal experience or feelings about the tournaments, or have we covered this enough? I think, Ryan, you mentioned that both for you and Nick, it was a really great experience overall.
Yeah, we rode home together and back to Amsterdam, and I feel like this was a great combination of just having the right people there, a good vibe. The tournament organizers are great. The venue was nice. I enjoyed being in that room. Everyone I played against was friendly. And that was even though I only went 1-2. So, for me, it's a lot more important to have a day like that doesn't feel like it's like Nick and I have both gone to tournaments that feel kind of like you just want to leave. you know, and especially by day 2, you're just like over it. But this was not that kind of thing, and I prefer 1-day tournaments, honestly. This was one of my favorites for sure.
Yeah.
Definitely kind of echoing the same thing as Ryan. My overall experience was just really, really fantastic. I felt super recharged and ready to get into more tournaments. So, like he said, we've been to some where we were just like, all right, that's it. I don't even want to play my last game. Like, I'm just out of here. And that was kind of the vibe for a while. And then this one really like reset the clock, and I was ready to go. It was so much fun. I was an idiot and forgot my scenery piece, and everybody was really forgiving about it. Let me use just a stand-in, which was nowhere near what the actual size was, but I ended up handicapping myself a bit to make it fair. But it was really just a really good environment, and I think everybody was pretty chill. And then it was, it was just a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And it's worth pointing out, Jonas, that you and I played 2 games the day before, and you even played one with one of the Nurgle lists that was ultimately to get some.
I piloted an army that I had never played before, and I just exactly copied a list that we could face. Yeah.
So ultimately, we both ended up playing 5 games that weekend, as if it was a 5-game tournament.
Yeah.
And yet I wasn't exhausted at the end of it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, I have to congratulate Michael and Rutger, who are the organizers and good friends of us all by now, because they did such a great job, and I really felt that their primary goal wasn't to create a competitive atmosphere, but just like a welcoming vibe where it was just, honestly, you were just lucky to get 3 games in a day, right? That was basically the idea. Like, enjoy your 3 games. There are some prizes, there is some scoring, but overall, you're just happy to play 3 games of Age of Sigmar, one of your favorite hobbies.
Exactly.
Yeah, it was kind of like a club. Like, we're hanging out and just rotating around. It did not have that intense vibe of, I'm out to win or anything like that. It was really just a lot of people having fun hanging out and playing the game they love.
And the way they handled the drinks and were really cool about, okay, it's just tap water, it's free. Like, those are the things that I personally enjoy and feel welcomed by. Just as it almost feels like I was welcomed into somebody's home, because also as you mentioned, Ryan, like the room there was actually really cool with the curtain. I'll show a picture later, but I actually enjoyed being there as well. Yes, I feared that it might be really stale or something, but apart from getting some extra oxygen in, there wasn't really anything that I would change about that.
Yeah.
I think our only struggle was finding food, right, Ryan? We spent like 16 different shops.
It's in kind of like a Turkish or Moroccan area, and it was Sunday, so everything was either shut down or like all the grocery stores were just like produce, and like there was nothing like ready made to get food. So we ended up just going to like a donor place, and it was actually nice. I liked it, but yeah.
Yeah, I think if you had to scour for food, that was probably the only problem I could see. That's why I brought a lot of my own food as well, because I was like, if I'm playing a close game and I only have 30 minutes to find and eat my food, I am going to feel sick afterwards. So yeah.
That's the game that you got done super early, though. So,
I was like, I have enough time to buy the produce, find a stove, start cooking.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right, let's move on to lists. So I started with your list, Ryan, and the viewers were really curious about this one because I already spoiled a bit about it. So you were running a cities list, but with dragons and also with Teclis and Selenar, who I also ran, and we played against each other in the first game. So that was really interesting. I'll just give the word to you and let you do the rundown and share your tactics and all that stuff.
Sure. So Settlers Gain is the city that lets you bring Lumineth as coalition, 1 in 4 of your drops, but no points restriction, which means you can bring Big Boy Teclis. And as I'm sure everyone on your channel is aware, because it's a Lumineth channel, Teclis's abilities are for a god character, really handy if you with any kind of allies, because they mostly focus on friendly units. So Protection of Teclis is just friendly units with 18 inches. And the I forget what it's called, but the Aura of Selenar, maybe the splashback wounds for Pelgamer, that's also friendly units within 16 inches or less if he's wounded. That the idea was, first I wanted to use Teclis. Two, I've been running Stormdrake Guard, and that unit can pretty easily get killed if you're not careful. And so the best save you can possibly give them in the whole game is this 5+ ward, which makes them at 9 wounds apiece and a 3-up save base pretty strong. But the other thing that kind of makes this list tick is that all of my battle mages, I gave both of them as an artifact, a type of artifact that gives them either Arcane Tome or the silver-plated wand that's in the subfaction, +1 spell to cast, plus they're getting +1 to cast from being in Seller's Gain, plus they're getting +1 to cast for being Gur battle mages, and finally they're getting +1 to cast if they cast the Life Swarm, an endless spell, and that's a city's general thing. So we've got Teclis, who can of course do up to 4 spells with really good casting, and the auto dispel, and then auto unbind, all that stuff. Plus you've got these 2 battle mages that are doing +2, maybe +3, and are 2 casters. So you've got 8 spells to cast, which is rivaling some of the bigger magic armies in a sense, which is kind of interesting. Unfortunately, the spells that come with Settler's Gain aren't particularly notable. The 2 that I've got here are just to take them. You're mostly focusing on things like, the Mystic Shields and their War Scroll spell like Wild Form, which gives +2 to charge, and maybe run as well. But honestly, it was just this blast of trying to do whatever I can with Teclis as this centerpiece. And I think in all of my games, I only lost Teclis once, maybe twice out of like 10 games that I played with him. I only lost the dragons like maybe one more time. So that VP giving up thing that came with the new battle scroll of giving 2 extra VP for knocking out the dragons, plus of course 1 for each monster in different battle rounds, didn't actually come into play nearly as much as I thought it would. The list is super fragile. Despite the 5-up ward, because I don't have a whole lot of bodies. Those crossbowmen can do a large amount of shots, but they're real easy to knock out. The flagellants are my crazy homeless guys, and I love them. I actually would enjoy running even more because they're super cheap and are fun to play with. But yeah, it was a fun list. Honestly, I think I lost more games in all the 10 games I played with this list than I won, but I never had a bad game. I had so much fun, and getting to play with a god character like Teclis and him benefiting so much my army, and plus his big spell, his big damage spell was huge. This was a blast. I would play this list more, and honestly, I'd probably just swap out the Storm Drakes and keep trying different combos with Teclis because it was super fun.
Yeah, and interestingly, because I probably should add this here, Teclis didn't know any other spells. He's not allowed to take any spells from the city's book, so he basically only knew his 2 War Scroll spells. And it was, for me personally, playing against this list, or against 3 iterations of this list, it was really interesting to see how you played Teclis compared to my play style, because I had so many more options. I was also always trying to cast 4 spells, and you were usually going for 2 or even 1 spell.
Against you, I had to do 1 because you have that auto unbind.
Yeah.
So and my auto unbind against you was always Total Eclipse. Once I learned that was what I do. That spell sucks. So yeah.
And now, I don't even think it's honestly, I don't think it's the most important spell to dispel, but it's just such a bad feel if it does go off, right?
Yeah, I mean, because if you get an odd number of CP, it's just totally wasted. And I don't know. I feel like CP use is one of the biggest things that 3rd edition has going for it, is all the redeploys, rallies, all these things. And all out attack, all out defense. I think it's really important. Keeping in mind the save stacking meta is largely built off of being able to all out defense too. So I don't know. I think it might be more important than it seems. but I had other unbinds as well. You know, like it wasn't. So it's not like I wasn't trying to unbind the other spells too, but
Yeah.
auto one for me.
Yeah. You know, after playing this list in a tournament setting now, what would you? Because you mentioned you would want to play more flagellants and even maybe leave out the Stormdrake Guard. What was your intention with the way you build it now? Because you mentioned like you want to play techless, but what was the plan of attack? I would say.
With this list, or
yeah, with this list, yeah.
Well, I knew from experience what the Stormdrake Guard can do, and so you know it was usually trying to manage your bubbles. I also think it's really I dabble with Tzeentch, and I really think having a magic heavy list like this is super fun. I just wish the lore was a little stronger. So it was really just trying to see if what the most I could pull off with this list, and it was built around survivability. Obviously, it's a very defensive list, apart from the fact that the Stormdrake Guard are pretty heavy with their shooting, right? And then taking objectives with those 4 Stormdrake Guard, if you can keep them alive, that's 20 points worth of models right there, which is almost more than I have in the rest of the army combined. It's coming up to it. I don't know. I feel like the biggest thing I was missing in this list from playing with dragons before was missing the Knight Draconis, who allows for that once per game hero phase extra shot from the big unit of Stormdrake Guard. And that made a difference, I think, but you just couldn't fit him in here points-wise or drops-wise with Teclis taking up so much of the army.
Yeah, and you included the Emerald Livestorm as well. What was the idea behind that? Was that mainly to keep your Stormdrake alive?
It could be, but it depends on the game, but sometimes it was to keep Teclis alive, because Teclis is such a linchpin for the army. So if Teclis dies, I feel like the list starts to really fall apart. But again, this isn't the most competitive list, but I had so much fun playing with it that the next thing I'm going to try with swapping something out here would be, instead of the Stormdrake, putting in Sentinels.
I was just going to ask that. That was my next question. Yeah. How many do you want to put in? 30?
I can't put in 30 as one block without taking Wardens, because I can't make them battle line. So they can't count as battle line. So I could only do a unit of 20 or 2 units of 20. I think that was what I was thinking, was maybe 2. But I'll have to fiddle with it a little bit.
Yeah. Maybe even consider some Wardens, to be honest, because Sentinels are great and all, but if you're playing 40 Sentinels in this list, and then what's taking objectives, right? What's defending your units?
Sure, that's true. Yeah, I mean, I lost the Flagellants and Crossbowmen most games pretty early on, but that was what they were there for. And honestly, it was mainly just the Battle Mages, Teclis, and the Stormdrake Guard running around, doing stuff, which might seem like, yes, I did lose most of my bodies, but the vast majority of my points were still there. I think, actually, in even the games where I lost a lot of, I lost by a number of points, I barely lost any units. It just wasn't a big part of the, how the army list, and that works, and that's what the Livestorm was kind of also there to do, was to keep me alive as long as possible.
Yeah, and the other benefit you get from Settler's Game, by the way, because you mentioned that it makes Lumineth Units Coalition, but it also gives you an extra artifact on every hero, right?
It gives me an extra artifact for a Collegiate Arcane or Free Guild hero, so I've got 2 Battle Mages here, and that's each got an artifact, yeah.
Yeah, okay, and then there's a +1 to cast.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Anyway.
And you put all of this in a battle regiment because obviously you want to have a say in the priority of the games. Would you normally want to go first with this list? If, say, somebody would want to run this list, would you advise them taking first turn most of the time, or would you shy away from it?
The only time I gave up first turn was if I didn't think Teclis or any of my other guys was in danger. Because Protection of Teclis doesn't get up if I don't take the first turn, right? So if anyone has any long strike type capability or alpha striking type stuff, I always took first turn to make sure I got that ward up. Because obviously I'm building it as a castle, deploying as a castle, and mainly staying there.
Yeah, and from the games that I played against you, basically your strategy is you keep the city units backwards, and then you move Teclis somewhat to the middle of the board, and then you get the Stormdrake right up in their face, right?
Yeah, that was the idea, and sometimes it works better than others. One of my games, I was particularly risky with my trying to slay the warlord on turn one with my Stormdrake Guard. It's totally possible, and not just mathematically, technically possible, but within the realm of like a decent margin of error. But I just didn't roll well enough, and then I think that game could have gone totally different. But that was the most aggressive I played, was against a Soulblight list, trying to take down the general Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon right off the bat.
And did it work out? No.
No, I mean I did kill him, but he ended up beating me pretty bad. But it was a fun game.
Yeah. Okay. And you mentioned that the spells don't really like matter here. Then, if the spells aren't really that important, why are you going for artifacts that give an extra spell cast?
Well, they're getting +3 to. I mean, because there's other spells, right?
Yeah,
so. Between the Arcane Bolt, Mystic Shield, Metamorphosis, the Life Swarm itself, Wild Form is on both of those Battle Mages, War Scroll, and then plus, I mean, one of these spells gives a shooting. You choose an enemy unit, and it gives a shooting unit +1 to hit. So that was pretty good for the crossbowman if I could get it off. And the other one gave a unit within 12 inches a 6+ ward, which was good if Teclis dies or if someone needs to leave the bubble. So they aren't bad spells, but yeah, they just weren't. I wouldn't say that was the focal point. But I think I had access to 9 spells and had 8 casts max. So I never really felt like I got to cast everything I wanted to. So even with the +2 casts from +1 cast for each one of these guys. So
yeah, okay, cool. Do you want to add anything else to your army list review, or?
What I think would be fun is to see because we've all played against each other. So what Nick and you say about this list and your experience against it, because I've admitted it's not the strongest, but yeah, what your experiences or thoughts were, and then we can do the same for each other's lists if you like.
Yeah, that's a great idea, because in the end we played against each other in the tournaments as well, right? I played tournament games against both of you guys. So that was a happy coincidence.
Right.
Yeah. Nick, maybe you want to start off with your experience against this list?
Yeah, so I didn't actually play against this list in the tournament, but I think the weekend before or something, me and Ryan were testing out our list, so we tried it. We had a pretty fun go at it. Teclis is obviously super annoying for my list because I'm highly dependent on command points, so Total Eclipse or anything like that. But I don't think you have Total Eclipse in this list. But your unbinds were also super annoying because you figured out which ones I actually needed, and we'll get to that when I talk about my list. So that changed a whole lot of things. But really, my frustration came from the dice roll. It was looking like I was going to end the game rather soon. And then good old Ryan decides he wants to rally his Stormdrakes. He has 1 left. 3 of them I've munched
Ryan move.
Yeah, and he rolls 3 6s, brings them all back, and then gets a nice little bubble around Teclis. He screened Teclis all the way around, so there was no way to get to him. So it was obnoxious, but I think I ended up taking that game as well over time. But I was in a healthy position fighting against this, and then with that redeploy, I think you took out all my dragons or 2 of them. I can't remember.
All of them, yeah.
Yeah, so it was upsetting to some degree, but playing against this list, yeah, it was interesting because the magic is really like in that pinch moment where I need to get a certain spell off to be really effective in my next move. Ryan just auto unbinds it. Protection of Teclis is always annoying. I didn't, like you said, I don't have any problem getting through the crossbowmen or the flagellants, and you'll see why when we talk about my list. And I think in this one I also had, you didn't really play hyper aggressive with your Stormdrakes, which I think was wise. So I kind of really controlled the board for most of the game.
Yeah, I don't remember which battle plan we played, but you definitely have an advantage on that.
Yeah. So being so mobile and again being able to threaten you from literally any position you're at was really helpful in my strategy there. But overall, I thought it was really fun to play against. I mean, anytime I see Stormdrake Guard in a list, I wince a little bit. Like I'm a little hesitant about getting in there. But yeah, it was really fun.
Yeah, I like to think that I play like a friendlier version of the Stormdrake Guard in the sense that I'm never taking them in Stormcast, and so they're not getting all of the synergies that they might want to get. But I also never take more. The most I've ever taken was 2 Knights Draconis and this one big block of 4, and I only did that once. Usually it was 5 or 4. So I don't know. I think that's a little friendlier. But right now I'm playing an 8 Fulminator list, so I'm a little more guilty over there. But
I also played against that list, and that ended exactly how you think it would.
I can imagine.
Yeah, well, maybe another time, but that was an interesting game. But with the Stormdrake Guard, yeah, I agree. This isn't the most like power gamey, but still, it still has potential to really put yourself in a good position, especially with your Unleash Hells and things like that.
Yeah, I think with the Stormdrake Guard, or what makes them annoying to play against sometimes, isn't specifically the Stormdrake Guard themselves, but it's what else you have to deal with in the army.
Yeah.
And that's a thing that I quite liked about playing against you, Ryan, that it is for me very clear what I have to do. Like, I deal with the Stormdrake and I win, basically. If I do it on time. Let me be clear.
Yeah, that's what I thought too, but then he rallied 3 of them back.
Well, there. We can talk about tactics and competitive play all we want, but in the end it is still a dice game, and I don't think any of us can say that we always lost or won all of our games fairly.
Well, you and I have a story to tell there.
Yeah.
Right, is this foreshadowing for your game?
Yes, very much so.
Well, we'll get to that later.
Jonas, did you have anything to say about this list? I think you've kind of commented,
I'll talk about it a little bit when we talk about our matchup, because we played, the first game I played was against you, Ryan. But from just a neutral kind of perspective, not a Lumineth perspective, I quite liked the idea of having Teclis in this list, but at the same time, I feel his price tag is a bit above what he can deliver for you. I was considering, okay, so what do you gain from Teclis? The 5+ ward, which is amazing, and the auto unbind. That's basically the reason why he's so good in your list, right? And then I went, okay, so I'm paying 740 points to get a 5 ward on 4 Stormdrakes, who are not gonna dominate the board all the time because they can only be at one place, right?
Yeah,
so,
I mean, also his spell, the Searing White Light, I think that does a thing too. I guess my only pushback would be, if you were thinking about any god character outside of their book being taken as coalition, I think he's doing the most work. Because keep in mind,
I agree. Yeah.
If I take Marathi, I can't afford to take a full unit of bow snakes with the drops limitations, because she counts as 2 drops. So I can't do Marathi and the bow snakes properly in cities. I can take a Lariel, but I don't know that she costs the same thing as Teclis basically, and I don't think she's pulling the weight that he's pulling.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Like, at the end of the day, I get what you're saying, because he doesn't have access to the full lore like he usually does, and all the other benefits, the synergies. But of the god characters to bring in, I think he's actually pulling more weight than one might think on just the paper of it all.
Oh yeah, I agree. If you're bringing a god character, I think this list is really original, and also like it was a great idea. It's just from a Lumineth perspective now, I find Teclis expensive in my Lumineth lists, and he has synergies all over the board there. And you're basically only getting the 5+ ward and the auto unbind and all that stuff. I mean, there is also the Storm of Seeing White Light, but that's so finicky, right? It's so swingy. Sometimes you get D6 mortals on everything, and then it's only 1 mortal from that roll. So I don't know. Yeah, he's the reason why I say that my list is a 4 rounds kind of list, because you really need him to be effective 5 rounds to get his points back.
That makes sense. The other thing to keep in mind about the Storm of Searing White Light is that it's like a better version of the shooting attack the Stormdrake Guard have. They only get or it's basically the same thing, except it goes off it gets D3 on 2 or more instead of 1. So you're basically getting an extra a bunch of Stormdrake Guard attacks if you can get that spell off, which is kind of fun. It's a lot of mortal wounds that this list can put out at the end of the day.
Yeah, I was just thinking when I played against you, like, I would probably be in trouble if it were 2x2 Stormdrake Guards. I understand what you're running for, but running 4 meant that if I screened well, I could prepare for it more easily, because there's really no other threat that I had to worry about, because Titlis is not the kind of god character that you can just charge into the front ranks and not worry about anymore, right?
Right.
Yeah. But all in all, like, I really appreciate you coming up with this kind of list. I love it. Let me just be clear about that.
It was fun. I don't think it's the strongest, but it was a blast. I would play this over a lot of the meta lists any day. So,
Yeah. All right, let's move on to the next one. That's Nick's list, Flesh-Eater Courts list. You named it Feeding Time, which was aptly named in the game that we played.
Yes.
So yeah, take us through this list.
Yeah, so I will try to do it as clearly as I can, but there's a lot of rules here. So to start with, we can take sub-factions, or we have delusions that we can also take. So I took the delusion, which is the feast day. And what that does is it lets me use an ability called Feeding Frenzy without spending a command point once per turn. And what Feeding Frenzy does is once a unit has fought in the combat phase for the first time, it can immediately pile in and fight again. So I'm basically getting 2 output every single turn with one of my dragons is the ideal spot to do it. And then, as you can see here, I have 3 dragons, all of them on Terrorgeist. And so each Terrorgeist has the War Scroll spell of giving 5-up ward. In addition, they also can use a command ability to summon a unit of flayers. So these are also super helpful. And then what I have is an Arch Regent, Artifact Dermal Robe, which is +1 to the cast Unbind, and then I have 10 units of ghouls. I'll go into the spells just because they all kind of go over each other, but going down the list, fighting weapon, that's self-explanatory. The mount trait Razor Clawed is a +1 rend to all the mounts attacks. There's 2. And then the next one down, I have the Frenzied Flesh-Eater, which allows me to reroll hits and wounds if the unit is within a unit that has taken damage. So this doesn't apply to one wound units, it's only things that actually have sustained wounds. And then the spell is Monstrous Vigor, which allows it to fight on its top bracket. The last dragon has Deranged Transformation, which allows you to add the wound characteristic of a model to its movement, but this only works to a maximum of 6. So I can only pick models with wound characteristics of up to 6 to do this. So anything above that, I can't select them for a unit. The Arch Regent has a spell, the Spectral Host, which allows it to give a unit flying. If that unit I select already has flying, that unit can then run and charge. If you roll, and this goes off on a 6, if you roll a 10, you can pick 3 units to do this. So you see where I'm going, this 3 dragons, 3 run and charge. And it also has a War Scroll spell, which is Ferocious Hunger, which if it goes off, I can add D3 attack to all of the attacks of a single unit. And then the Ghoul King has a spell Blood Feast, which is I don't use very often, but what it allows you to do is you pick an enemy unit within 12 inches, and a friendly unit within 6 inches. You roll on a 6, it's D3. On a +10, it's D6, and that is mortal wounds. And whatever mortal wounds are sustained on the enemy unit, you can then heal that amount to the friendly unit that you selected. In addition, they have a War Scroll spell that will allow them to add +1 to the attack characteristics of a single unit. So overall, and both of these 2 guys, the Arch Regent and the Ghoul King, can summon. The Arch Regent can summon a unit of Flayers. A unit of Flayers is only 3, so for the Terrorgeist, they can summon 3 per. The Arch Regent can summon 3 Flayers. It can summon a Vargul Courtier, and it can also summon 20 Ghouls. So I have to pick. I can only do that once per battle. The Ghoul King can summon 10 unit of Ghouls. And the deployment for summons is any table edge 6 inches and 9 inches away from enemy unit. So this is kind of tying back to how we said I can really put threat on any side of the board that I need to and really get in your face a lot. And so when you look at my total wounds, I'm sitting at 85, which could be a little low, but when you factor in the ability to summon, that actually is an additional 55 to 58 wounds that you're really, depending on what I select to summon. So I'm actually sitting around 140-ish wounds. So it's actually quite a chunky list. Obviously, I have my battle regiment and my command entourage for the extra mount trait. So, which I think I skipped over on the bottom was gruesome bite, and then gruesome bite is for one of my attacks I can re-roll failed hit rolls, and for this gruesome bite is related to the attack the Fanged Maw. If you don't know what the Fanged Maw is, it's the big scary dragon attack where if on a hit roll I roll a 6, that's an automatic 6 mortal wounds. So this allows me to re-roll fail ones to really go fishing for 6s. That's the list. It's pretty fun to play against. It's quite fast. There's a lot of summoning, and the ideal scenario is really buffing up your dragons, getting them extra attacks, and fishing for those 6s. Doing some rerolls if possible, and then just ripping through. And if you didn't get it the first try, save that command point, because then you could pile in an attack again. So, in my experience, any dragon that charges, I'm usually deleting whatever I need to in that go.
Yeah, I can attest to that. The dragons, like in that game that we played later with my fulminators, it was just a matter of who went first. Really, at the end of the day, like you were going to take out anything that you got to go into. I particularly really like this list. I've played a few of Nick's other Flesh-Eater Courts lists, and he's got one that's much more horde-ish with 1,000,000 dice rolls, which maybe he can illuminate us a little bit about. But
Yeah.
But this list I find fits with the Gur monster meta idea super well. I like that it's a pretty elite army, especially if you don't bring in any of the ghouls with the summons. You're just bringing in the Vargolfs or the what are the
Players.
Players, yeah. So I in this list, I think is just a really fun list to kind of play against. It needs to get its spells off sometimes, but like. I don't know. I think it like is. I'd be curious to hear, Nick, why you think Flesh-Eater Courts is in quote unquote a bad place right now. When I feel like you've done really well with this list, all things considered.
Well, so I think first off, this is a new list because they dropped the points on the Terror guys. So this is brand new, able because I'm at 2,000 on the dot, so you couldn't fit this in before. Secondly, I think my counter still is shooting, so I can get shot off the map real quickly. And then if you're able to shut down my spells, I can still do a lot of damage. But once these dragons are down, they're down for the count. Like it's over for me. So I really have to do some really, like I said earlier, some critical resource management, and we'll talk about our game later, but that was one of the things, and one of those options is, just get your dragon out of there, because our army has a really good ability of healing. So Terrorgeist can heal D3 every single hero phase, their own hero phase. You couple that with heroic recovery, you're healing, essentially D6. So it's pretty insane, the healing that you can actually be back in the game. And again, with them being so fast, they have a 14-inch move that does bracket over time, but you can also give that run and charge. You're going to be right back in the game really, really fast. Also, like I alluded to when we were discussing your list, is we're very command point heavy. So while my extra fight and pile in is free, my summoning isn't. So I have to make sure that I save a command point to summon. Our saves aren't amazing. The dragons are at 4, everything else is around a 5 or a 6. So all defense is usually a must that we need to prepare for. And so when you slap them with a total eclipse, this becomes really, really challenging. And so that I think there's a lot of counters to these lists, but I also think, the changes to the rules, we may have a comeback. I hope to be the comeback, but we'll see. It's still pretty early with this, so we'll see how I do in the next tournament.
I think what makes this list very good is that you have 3 major threats that you really need to deal with at the same time, usually. And neither of them are the linchpin of your army, right? Even if you lose one early game, it's not game breaking. You can still do what your list is intending to do. You've got the Crypt Ghouls to back up your to defend your backline. You've got the smaller heroes to run around, and they also do pretty well in combat, I have to say. Because if you're looking at this list, you're thinking, okay, all the damage is from Terrorgeists, but the Arch-Regent guy does a fair bit of damage.
Yeah, he's got 7 attacks, 3s and 3s, so he can do it. But I think also, like we said earlier, is a lot of the threat of my army isn't on the board or in the list. It's my summons, and they're the distractions that I use for misdirects. That is like, oh great, now I get to do this, or I charge them in and I tie you up for a turn. They're there to die, but they're chunky, so they're going to die well, and also they're a pretty interesting shooting mechanic, which I can get into in a second. That is different, and our damage is mostly mortal wounds. Our basic damage it's good, like when you look at the dragons, but when you really start to consider the rest of the list, all of the strength is in the mortal wound output. And that's where, unless I'm fighting chaos, this is really one of those things that we excel at really, really well.
Yeah, and I would say this list does. I think this list will do well in the current meta, how it's looking right now, because your output is, as you say, it's a lot about mortal wounds, and a lot of people are focusing on having the same kind of damage output, but you don't really care as much about the mortal wounds, right? Because usually mortal wound attacks have a lower number of attacks. And for you, because you have such a low save, you're probably worse off when your opponent has more low quality attacks than a small number of high quality attacks, because damage is damage, right, for you.
Yep.
And you got the 6 ward from Deathless Minions anyway. So yeah, for me it was a very interesting matchup, because I had no idea how I was going to deal with this, and I still don't really I still don't really think I have a way to deal with the list I brought. I think I have some variation on it that could do well, and to be fair, a double turn in the second turn might have made the difference in our game, but that's how it goes.
They're very steamrolling if you can get a double turn with these, because that's essentially you've attacked with all your dragons. So this is what 4 goes with the dragon, then you do another 4, so you've gone 8 times with these dragons of just brutal amounts of damage.
Yeah, and then you're charging in a dragon, and it's like your maw attacks all go your way at some point, and then you're like, okay, so that's 18 mortal wounds from one guy.
And then I pile it and do it again.
Yeah, exactly.
And Nick, remind me, does when you get bracketed on those dragons, do they get much worse?
So their movement is probably the most difficult part to overcome, but not really. So the one that you care about, the mortal wounds, doesn't get bracketed. So even that, it really doesn't matter. They have an attack called the Skeletal Claws, which gets bracketed the number of attacks that you get. But yeah, for the most part, it's all about the Fanged Maw, which is your 6 mortal wound, or on 6s.
Yeah, and an advantage that you spoke of and that you really enjoyed, I'll say, in the tournament here is that nobody really knew anything about Flesh-Eater Courts, right? All your opponents were like, okay, explain to us. And then you explained like you do now, and it's really a clear explanation, but still there's so much to remember, right? And when you're playing against this list, I felt like I had to play against it just in case everything went your way. What would happen if all your spells went off? What would happen if you got the reroll and made all your charges? What would happen if I had your reinforcements in my backline? So I had to prepare for all those scenarios, and then not knowing what most of those spells do because the names aren't obvious, right? Like Monstrous Vigor, I could interpret that spell a million different ways.
Yeah, and I think that, not trying to pull a fast one on people, but that is a definite advantage in my favor, because there's so many spells, and you saw that I forgot things that as I was explaining it, that people lose track of which one they want to get, and that's what I was getting at, is Ryan pinpointed which one really mattered, and that's the Ferocious Hunger. That's the D3 extra attacks. So when you really look at it, let's look at the bottom Terra guys with Gruesome Bite. That's re-rolling your hits for Fanged Maw. 6s are your 6 mortal wounds. If my spells go my way, and let's say I add 3 extra attacks to that, it's a 3 basic, and then I add the other one from the Ghoul King on there, so I've added 4 attacks to this. That gives me 7 dice rolls that I can re-roll. How many of those, statistically, Brian, you're the math guy, are going to be 6s, right? So
yeah,
that's in one shot. And let's say it didn't go my way, I can pile it and do it again for free. So that's 14 dice that I can essentially put out 6 mortal wounds.
Yeah. Did you want me to run the math right now? Is that what?
You could just agree with me, please.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, it's good.
Yeah, I think we can agree that statistically it's like 1.5 or a bit less than that, but still, Yeah, it was very overwhelming to play against, and I think that's why you mentioned that they're not in a good place, because me and Ryan, we've lost to this list quite convincingly. And I think we have a kind of image or a kind of idea about flesh eaters because we don't know a lot about it, and you know flesh eaters through and through, and you know the weaknesses that we're still coming to grips with, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think also when you think about like priority, I've got a 5-drop. I'm typically not going to get to choose. And then with 3 monsters on the table, I'm going to get, pretty easy, assuming they don't get shot off, but I'm going to get some pretty easy early points. So Ferocious Advance, 3 monsters. And I think that was the same in our game. Like, I just don't move them, and I create a really, really defensive bubble. So surrounded by cripples, and then again coupled with you don't really know what this list does, you're more inclined to say, I'm going to give you the turn and figure out what you're going to do, but then I don't move and I just get all the dragons at full strength and I wait. And so that it kind of throws people off on what to expect with that, and then it gives me a little bit of an advantage. I think that will burn out eventually if this list ever takes off, but we'll see.
I agree. Yeah, it's a bit like the Storm Drake Guard list, right? It's strong, but everyone knows what it does right now. There's really nothing to hide behind, and you kind of still have that small advantage of people not knowing fully well what your list does. But yeah.
And then the one thing that I didn't mention yet, but I alluded to it, was the shooting in this army. So the mortal wound output, it's not based on hits or wounds, it's based on bravery. So when we look at the dragons, they have a table, and it brackets as well. And then so on the top of the table, it's a 6. And what I do is I pick a unit, and I roll a d6, and I add that amount to the table value. So on top bracket, it's 6. And I compare that to your mortal wound, your bravery, and the difference between the dice roll and your bravery is the mortal wound output.
Yeah.
And so if I'm fighting, base normal units, we're looking at what averages of 6s or 7s. So I'm getting a pretty decent amount of mortal wounds in there, and that essentially triggers my frenzied flesh eater, which is reroll wounds, assuming that this is not a 1 wound model. And so it really complements itself. And then with the flayers that I can summon, I have to be outside of 9, but the range of their shot is 10. So I can immediately start shooting right away, and they have a similar shot as well. So it helps a lot to just soften units up before I even get there.
Yeah, I think this list is such a good elite killer list, I would say, because if you've got enough bodies with just a large amount of wounds and no like high save or high quality kind of models, it doesn't really affect you that much, all the shooting and the deep striking and the mortal wound output. But if you're playing something like Ryan is playing with the dragons, or Lumineth is very elite in itself, every model that you lose to a mortal wound screech, you really feel.
Yeah.
And I brought 3 screens, and I had difficulty screening against you because I was like, I have to cover my front against 3 Terrorgeists, but also cover both of my flanks against deep strikes. So there was no way I could predict everything. So that's the strength of this list, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Ryan, anything to add?
No, I think Nick very convincingly covered his meta but strong army. So I think he did a good job there.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, quickly moving on to my list. Then I made an entire video on this list just two days ago. So if you're watching this and you're interested in the inner workings of it, there's a video. Go check it out. Just a quick rundown or a quick sketch about what my idea was. So I was also running a techless list, and I ran it in Zytrek because I really wanted to double down on the magic dominance of the Lumineth. I'm still quite happy with it being in Zytrek, but I do feel like it was very easy to come to grips with the list for my opponents as well, because the bonus that you get from Zytrek is so static. But it did make my Lord Regent very tanky, for example. I also didn't bring the classic 30 Sentinels, which I really wished I had when I was playing against Nick. But in the other games, I kind of was okay with it. I liked having a lot of Wardens, and the block of 20 Wardens is still very scary. Especially if you're aware of what they can do in my game against the 7 Dragon list, Paul was very aware of the danger that they pose to his list. So, you know, I might, if I would be more competitive or if I was more planning on winning the entire thing, I still think I would need 30 Sentinels probably, but the 20 Warrens was fun as well. I would obviously wanted to bring this in a battle regiment because having a say in the priority was huge for me. And I really liked having a tanky Lord Regent with a 4-up ward save due to the Gift of Selenar artifact. So other than that, it's kind of the typical Lumineth list. I'm not going to go into detail anymore, but I am curious to hear about what you guys thought about this list, especially our game, Ryan, where we had the tech list, the tech list off, I would say. That was very interesting for me, at least. So some quick input or ideas about this list before we look at the matchup specifically?
Most of the games I've played against Lumineth have been against you, but I do think it's worth pointing out that you are a good general of Lumineth, and that's not an easy task. Like, you printed out cards, you might want to share those on another video, I can imagine, at some point, but you print out all these reminders and things to help you keep track of the very large amount of spells and other effects that need to go on in the game, and I think you're very good at managing that. As far as the list is concerned, I feel like the one of the big things I noticed was obviously the techless, the difference in running techless, and sometimes I wonder if, because you seem to default to doing 4 spells with him, and I think in maybe some circumstances I would default to 2. Mm-hmm. And I would be curious to hear what because 2 can be basically auto cast for anyone that can't get a +1 to unbind. So is there a particular reason why you leaned towards 4? I mean, obviously it's nice to have 4, but you have so many other spellcasters in this list too. Did you feel like you always needed that, or that sometimes that ended up biting you in the butt? Having to
in certain turns, I think especially in hindsight, I regretted casting 4. It's just my go-to move usually, so I don't always think about it as much as I should, and that was kind of a schooling that I got from your play style with Techless. And I think my game might have been a little bit differently if I had done 2 casts against Nick, for example, because it makes him much harder to dispel, right? Because he dispelled a lot of my 10 casts with double 6s, which would not have worked if I had only cast 2. But then I'm usually like, this list really doubles down on the magic dominance, as I said, and I really needed almost all of my buffs all the time. I need the Lambent Light, I need the Total Eclipse, I need the protection of Techless, I usually needed the Life Swarm. There was so much toys, I would say, or tools that I wanted to use that I usually opt for casting 4, and I'm not too bothered if... Say that I want 4 really great toys and I lose one of them, but I still get 3. I can usually live with that. Though I do have to say that the protection of Techless, not getting that, for example, against Nick, was really huge. So yeah, I think that's some very fair criticism that I also considered after the tournament. Like, I should be thinking about casting 2 more often than I usually just do my 4. Yeah.
What's the thought of the stone guard? Do you feel like they were just filling a place? Do you because you've got 130 points to play with your 10 points left over?
Yeah.
Do you feel like the stone guard really pull their weight outside of Metrica?
Absolutely not. But let me tell you about the Lumineth. So when the points cost for Sentinels went up to 170, everyone was like, that is not impactful at all. And I agree, if you zoom in on the Sentinels just by themselves, 170 is not a fair point cost. I 100% agree. But then you have to remember that in a Lumineth Force, all of your units are extremely expensive. And the cheapest unit that we have, like non-hero units, is Stone Guards with 120 points. And
right.
So you can't take any more Wardens because the Sentinels went up 20 points. You can't take any more Dawn Riders because the Sentinels went up 20 points. I can't bring 30 Sentinels without giving up 2 units because Sentinels went up 20 points. You see what I'm getting at? So it was a decision of having an extra screen, and the only screen I could pay for were Stone Guard, and then the Emerald Lifeswarm, or losing both and including more Sentinels.
Yeah, so this is where my allies thing comes in, and with Teclis giving out his buffs to those allies, it's not the worst thing, but for 130 you get 10 Thralls, Namarti Thralls.
Yeah.
Or you could get 5 Vindictors, who I think hit harder than the Stone Guard and have a 3-up save.
Well, the only ally for Lumineth, sadly, is Ideneth, so...
Well, you can't break Stormcast.
Can I?
I don't know. Maybe they changed...
No.
I thought... Good.
No, just IDK, sadly. So that's really bad. Yeah, and I did consider bringing the Thralls, but I didn't have enough time to buy and paint them. But yeah, in the end, I think I really wanted to bring the Stone Guard because no one else does.
Right.
I'm not gonna lie about that. That's also why I brought 20 Sentinels, because everyone else brings 30. And I really wanted to make a point and show that 20 works, and I still think it's really good, honestly. And the Stone Guard, I could trade them in for the Thralls. I do agree, and I think the Thralls would be more threatening, because at some point I charged in my 5 Stone Guard into Nick's 10 ghouls, and I lost that fight. And I was like, well, this feels bad. And I think the Thralls would have made easy work of those tiny ghouls. So yeah, I do agree that would have been a better pick. I definitely agree there. But there is some elegance to running a pure list, I would say.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And the Stone Guard are cool models. I just, I definitely feel that was kind of where you spent your leftover points. I do wonder if maybe another Endless Spell might have been more interesting, though. Obviously, it wouldn't fill your battle line. Not battle line, but your screens. Kind of.
I had this game that I played against Leven, who's running the Orc War Clan list with the 2 Maw Crushers. Yeah. And I only played against one of his Maw Crushers, and my list wasn't optimized either, but I had a really tough time dealing with that. And I knew that there were going to be a lot of monsters and a lot of alpha striking melee threats. So I knew I had to bring at least 2 or even 3 screens. And the points just fell that way. I could drop the Stone Guard for a portal, for example, because that's the only spell that I could see making a difference in my list. Yeah. But then you have a lot of points left, and I think I would have felt that, because the spell portal was really strong in the earlier days before the smaller board size for the Teclis Storm or Seeing White Light damage tornado. But now, honestly, everyone's usually in range of Teclis by turn 1 or turn 2, right?
Yeah.
If I really wanted to get value from him, I could just teleport him up and then do the tornado as well. So the only reason why I would ever still bring the portals is either for Lambent Light, but then I only have 20 Sentinels. So if I would have brought 30, I would have liked having a longer range on my Lambent Light. Or when I'm running the Cathalar against a Destruction army with low Bravery. Because she has a spell, if you're not aware, she has a spell where you basically have to roll below your Bravery for every action you want to make. So attacking, piling in, moving, shooting, charging, whatever. It's basically the Be'lakor ability, but on a Bravery roll.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I don't know. If I would change anything, I would probably drop the Lifeswarm and the Stone Guard for more Sentinels. That's I think the only change I would like to make. And then split off the 20 Warden group in 2 groups of 10 for more screening. Yeah,
that's fair.
Yeah. Nick, anything to add?
No, I think I would agree with what you mentioned. Just like when I think about our game, it's dealing with those Sentinels was the challenge and being able to get back there. So I think more screening is helpful. I do remember that I had a hard time kind of punching through originally, so I had to do a couple of retreats, and then dice went my way. But other than that, I think, I'll agree with Ryan. I mean, the Stone Guard, I think for value is not super there, especially maybe when I'm just biased for my list because mine's all more wound output and they're really just ignoring your rend.
Yeah.
So with that, and then I think the Dawn Riders are helpful, but it just, for me, it's keeping those Sentinels alive, because that is where it's at. I think personally, is just being able to delete things, and especially like you're mentioning, if you up that to 30, you get Lambent Light going. You're really going to be. I'm not saying anything new. It's just really a huge threat that you have to deal with.
Yeah, I agree. But then in my head, I was like, okay, if I'm bringing 30 Sentinels, first of all, that's a known tactic, so everybody knows how to deal with that, or how they should be dealing with that. But also, it's kind of the thing that I thought about when I was looking at Ryan's list as well. It's almost just one threat, right? Just as Ryan has the 4 dragons, I would have the 30 Sentinels. And if you suffer from a turn 1 long strike shooting combined with dragons, for example, on your Sentinels, then you're done.
Yeah.
There is really no way that you're coming back from that. So I really want to have multiple threats. When I play with my vampires, I always have at least 2 or 3 threats, because I just feel how advantageous that is to my playstyle, and how more difficult it is for opponents to deal with that. So I didn't want to be the classical one kind of threats type of Lumineth list. But there's obviously a reason why that's one of the only lists that's doing well. Or that did well. Yeah.
But I think short of your Sentinels, what was threatening to me was your 20 block of Wardens.
Yeah,
that was threatening just in and of itself, just looking scary coming at me. So for that, it's picking what I need to deal with first, because that's going to do a pretty healthy amount of damage as well. So I think with the 20, it's pretty threatening, and then somehow working in your Wardens and your Sentinels is a double threat. I don't think it's just the single. So I think you had a pretty good approach to that.
Yeah, I just wanted to still play the typical techless build, but with a twist. So I think I did well in that regard, but the results sadly weren't there. Well, talking about results, let's move on to the matchup and talk about results eventually. Ryan, I put you up first here. So when we're looking at your matchups, you were playing 2 Lumineth games and 1 Soulblight game. The first one was against me, so the techless and Venari build. Then a typical Soulblight list that you might expect these days, with the Virkos, a lot of Graveguard, Manfred, all that kind of jazz. And then a very atypical, more mixed kind of style Lumineth list from Tim, who's one of the nicest players that I know, and who is so open and friendly about him still learning Lumineth. I really like that about him. But yeah, tell me about those matchups.
Well, the only one I won was the last one. And to be fair, like Tim, this was his first tournament. I think he might have had a feel bad. I don't know what his first 2 games were like, but I feel like by the time he got to our game, he was kind of just like tired of getting his teeth kicked in or whatever. I don't know how his other games went, but he was a good sport about it, and that was a strong performance for me. The highlight of that last game for me was definitely that my Free Guild crossbowmen ended up killing Eltharion, because they just have weight of dice behind them. A block of 10's got 20 attacks, and they're not hitting particularly great, but you just got to get stuff through, and because he's got that unrendable save. And does he have a ward too? I can't remember. Does Eltharion have a
No,
ward?
he doesn't. And I'm so glad that you're bringing this up, because we had an argument yesterday in the Strategoi Discord, because there's only 2 sides when you're talking about Eltharion. You either love him or you hate him. And I'm sadly in the latter category, because I think there's such an easy way to deal with him, right? The only time that he's doing well is against a low volume of high quality attacks. But either mortal wounds or a high volume of low quality attacks will deal with him pretty easily. So I'm glad you're bringing this up, yeah. But no ward.
Yeah, so that was the win. The middle, I'll go in reverse order, because let's end with the highlight, which is definitely playing against you. Soulblight was against David, and it was a lovely game. I really enjoyed playing with this guy. I mentioned that I went in head first with the Slay the Warlord and almost got it, but not quite. And then Oh man, Soulblight, the Graveguard. I think he had 2 blocks of 20 Graveguard, and that was a punishing game. And here's a lesson for people that go to tournaments. One of the options that we have at the end of, if you don't get through all your turns, is that you can kind of start projecting into the future. And, or, we only had so much time to go through turn 4, and we were sitting on turn 3. And keep in mind that points differential is really important in where your standings are. And I said, sure, let's start playing turn 4 and just see what happens. And he was able to totally wipe out my dragons, and it just went from I was going to lose to I was going to lose by a lot. And in retrospect, as much as I enjoyed playing with the guy, I shouldn't have let it go, because we only had like 20 minutes left. I shouldn't have let it go to turn 4. Because then I would have kept a much more respectable point differential. But I had a blast playing with him. We even exchanged dice, which I now use his dice exclusively as my CP dice, because it looks different on the other one. So that's actually I've really enjoyed that, actually. But and then against you, obviously this knocks out 2 birds with 1 stone, because you would talk about it too, and of course you do the same with Nick. I think the most important note about our game could have gone either way, and perhaps the easiest indicator of this was that it was down to a roll-off, because we both had 1-drop lists, and I got the roll-off, and yet still lost, so good job there. I can't remember if I did anything particularly tactically kind of like stupid, but I feel like it just I feel like it just didn't work out in my favor this time, despite getting the first the choice of who went first. But I had a blast playing against you, and we had played 2 games the day before, so it felt like I had a little mini 3-game tournament with just you, which was kind of awesome. And you kicked my ass, so you did a good job that weekend.
Yeah, I think for our game personally, it was very interesting for me. When we were playing both Teclises against each other, you could really see the strength difference, right? Even though he still did work for you, but Teclis in Lumineth is just even more of a powerhouse than he is in cities. That's something that I really felt when I was playing against you. Like I had so much more options, and having the auto unbind and you only really taking Teclis for the 5-up ward, or mainly for the 5-up ward, that was such an easy dispel for me, or unbind for me every time. And that's I think why it was somewhat of an uphill battle for you. But
well, yeah, I didn't actually I always had you forced me to choose 1 spell.
Yeah.
So you didn't get the unbind, but you forced me to lose the other 3.
Exactly. Yeah.
So.
And the dragons, you went first. You killed my screen of 10 wardens, and I think you even got into a unit behind that, but then I managed to slap your dragons down with my 20 wardens.
Yeah. And
I think that's one of the games that I probably would have lost if I had played 30 sentinels, for example. I would easily have won that if I had gone first, but I would have lost that game if I hadn't had the 20 wardens, because 20 wardens, healthy and at full strength, they slap. They really do. So yeah, I think that was kind of the turning point for us. Although it was a game until the end. I still think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Was there any tactical thing that you feel like you messed up on that game? And of course, it's been a couple weeks since we did these.
Yeah, so. I don't remember our game as specifically as I remember the other 2 games, because as you say, we played 3 games and it's kind of all of a jumble now. But no, I do think that we both played pretty well, if I can say so myself.
Yeah.
And it's just dice. And I wouldn't say either of us was very lucky or unlucky. But I would say that you were a little bit more unlucky than I was that game. And
I think some of the dragon shooting in particular.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think I paid the price for that in my 2 following games, because victory point wise, I won that game against you quite convincingly. But then I lost both of my other games quite convincingly in the end. So yeah.
That's it for me.
Yeah. Okay, Ryan. Nick, on to you. So you had the pleasure of playing against a 7 Stormdrake list piloted by Paul, who's a great player, as we mentioned. Ryan has played against him in a different tournament. I played against him in my second game. Then you played against a mixed list of Khorne, which you don't really see that often either. So that must have been a really interesting matchup. And then you played against me in the third round. So tell me how it went for you.
Yeah, so the Stormcast went about as good as you could imagine. So it's important, like I said, he's got the Nitroconus, 7 Stormdrakes, and also 6 Long Strikes. Did what I could in the first couple of turns. Didn't want to be too hyper aggressive getting in there. Maybe I still played, I think, too aggressive. So after turn 2, I kind of got that itch of like, all right, I need to do something. I need to get inside of his threat range and start bothering him a little bit. And then with that, he kind of let me overcommit and then just countered me to death, and then waited to use his hero phase shots on everybody, and then ultimately when he was ready, he just picked everything off. And so I think we ended up calling it at the start of 4, at the end of 3, something like that. It was a pretty good beating, but ultimately he didn't get the perfect 20-0. It was 19-1, so I was happy I got my 1 point on the board. But ultimately, yeah, I learned a lot. It helped for the next Stormdrake list that I will inevitably play against. And then, yeah, Paul was really, really fun to play against and helpful, I would say, in terms of giving that feedback and how I could have done better and what he was concerned about, so I can maybe exploit that in the next list of really making sure that my list is optimized for how to counter these other ones.
Yeah, because he's really focused during the game, and I almost expected from the look at his list, I expected him to be really strict. And then he somewhat was, but at the same time, he gave me a lot of opportunities to, maybe sometimes even reverse a small thing. Probably because he was also very confident that he was going to win the game against me, to be fair. But yeah, he was, especially at the end, he was really kind in his feedback. And I think he mentioned something that I needed him to tell me. And he mentioned, like, you could have won this game if you had priority in turn 2. And I do kind of agree. So, even though it is a tough list to deal with because he has 6 Drakes and then the 7th Drake with the Nitroconis on it, and then 6 Long Strikes and a Chariot, I expected him to be all up in our face turn 1, but he's very patient. And as you say, he leaves these openings for you where you think, like, I'm going to exploit that now, and then he just bounces, right?
Yeah, exactly. So he was complete, like, when you look at it in hindsight, he was in complete control, knew when he wanted to do it, and then so he just kind of waited, and then I walked right into the sights, and then he just capitalized, and that was it. So it was actually really impressive to watch. And then yeah, well, like you said, they were strict, but I think the expectations were set really clearly in the beginning, which I appreciated. This is how we're gonna play our game. It was great. And yeah, like no complaints there. I mean, the list is the list, but you can't avoid it. So I was happy to play against him and learn what I could from it.
Mm-hmm. And then your second game?
Yeah, so Khorne, that was a fun one. I've never played a list quite like this before. Usually I'm used to more Bloodthirsters and things like that. And so there's the one Bloodthirster. He only had one Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage. He had 2 Slaughter Priests and a Slaves to Darkman Demon Prince, but then a plethora of chaff and just chunky things. So he had a lot of Blood Warriors. He had a block of 20 that he was really using as his anvil in the center. And then he had some chaff following his Demon Prince. And ultimately, I had the advantage here because right before the game, the TO walked up and said, "I'm making a tournament call and move the scenery around really quick." So we went from a really open field to a pretty constricted one, actually. And so being a flying unit, I had the advantage of being able to hop over and these sorts of things. So he did a really good job of screening out as best he could. But then ultimately, it's those double attacks from the dragons were just munching through everything he threw at him. And, the ghouls surprisingly tanky, as we'll discuss. And so they were able to hold off his Demon Prince, which was quite something. And then just being able to summon bodies on top of things. So just kind of out counting him on different objectives. And I think the those moments where it's it's comical, but you also feel bad was I charged in my dragon into his bloodthirster. We did the first round of combat. We get to the Fanged Maw. I roll 3 6s, 18 mortal wounds, bloodthirster gone. Didn't do a thing the entire game.
No,
so that one I was like, oof, okay.
That hurts.
Yeah, that was brutal. And so it was just kind of like one of those moments where it was just, you can see the potential for my list of how devastating that can be. I mean, the odds of that happening are not very, what is it, 1 in 216? But it's just, it's not, yeah, it was just pretty rough that way. And then once that happened, I was just kind of cleaning up after that. This was on Savage Gains as well, so I'm taking the 4-pointers and all that sort of thing. So it was a fun game. I enjoyed playing against my opponent. I think he mentioned he was relatively newer to figuring out how to optimize corn, so he was just trying different things. So that was really fun to see. But yeah, it was an interesting game. And then last game against yourself. This game taught me one big thing, and it's that this is a dice game. I have never rolled so good in my life, and I will never roll that good again, I think, ever. We started off, I think you may have given me the turn?
Yeah, I gave you the turn, yeah.
Yeah. So, again, starting off slow, you unleashed a pretty gnarly barrage of arrows, didn't kill anything, but then you kind of got to see where the healing comes from and that sort of thing. And you also were very obnoxious with your total eclipse, so starving me of command points. And so that was an uphill battle for me in the beginning. Then it really started to go in my favor where I'm unbinding things. I need, double 6s, and I'm getting them consistently to take off, Lambent Light, Power of Hish, what was the other one?
Protection of Teclis.
Yeah, Protection of Teclis, just consistently getting that. And then also outside of unbinding, my cast rolls were consistently 10s, 11s. Like, it was unreal how good those were doing. And then I think the other thing that I had going it for me was the summons, where I kept getting in the backline, making the charge into your sentinels, so diverting them away from my dragons. They were luckily surviving the any sort of unleash hells or any attacks, so that helped quite a bit. And I think the defining moment was one of the last turns where you were going for the dragon, bring it down, and then you needed your Power of Hish, and it got unbound.
Yeah.
It was rough. But ultimately, I thought it was a very good game, and that if we really take out the dice rolls, that game looks really different, I think. What I think was very consistent was when we look at the dragons versus your screens and things like that, the double pilot is so devastating. And then, especially when you couple that with no protection of Teclis or anything, you're just eating that damage consistently. But it really was a time clock for me. It was I couldn't let your sentinels sit there, so I had to keep moving on that. And also I had to be mindful, I had to spread out. I couldn't pile in because Teclis was sitting right there, so I needed to keep everything away from him as best I could. And so it was a really dynamic game, moving a lot, really having to utilize all of my tool belts, especially with Total Eclipse. I ended up having to retreat one of my dragons back to my scenery piece so that I could summon for free, all sorts of things. And I think there was a lot of confused looks on your face, mostly because the army is a mystery, more or less, and so I was like, what are you doing?
Yeah, honestly, at some point, I was like, okay, so I've killed that dragon now, right? He was on 3 wounds, and you're like, no, he's on 9 wounds. How? And then, you start naming all the ways that you healed him, and I was just like, good God, I just can't anymore. Yeah, because I went into that game like very hyped, because you're Ryan's friend. I hadn't had the chance to play against you. It was a new army for me, and I loved the look of it. So I was really looking forward to it. And you were dreading the face-off against Lumineth. And personally, for me, I went to the tournament with one goal, and I just wanted to win one game. That was fine for me. So when I heard that it was an uphill battle for you, I kind of got hopeful. I was like, maybe I can get in 2 wins. And I really was looking forward to that. And just the face-off, right? And then the game, the first turn was fine. I thought that I would force you to come closer to me with my sentinels, but you actually played it very safely, which I admired. And I brought your dragon down to 3 or 4 wounds, I think. And that's why I mentioned that I really wished I had 30 sentinels there, because I would have consistently killed a dragon or a unit per turn with 30. And with 20, I was always just short, always.
Yeah, that was a lifesaver for me, absolutely. My ward saves weren't helping. And then, there was multiple times it was just by, so close that the dragon was going to die. And then so, again, resource management, I was like, okay, great, now I have to retreat him, and now I got to distract the sentinels. So, like, there was just so much bookkeeping of, like, okay, spells, what has what, who needs what, all that sort of thing going on.
Yeah, and then you made these small papers with the spells on, which is helpful. But still, like, I was so overwhelmed. You gave me a quick rundown of the spells, and I tried to write them down in a book. And then the game started, and I still had to keep asking you, okay, what does that Terrorgeist do again? So personally, for me, I liked playing against you, and I don't mind playing against Flesh-Eater Courts. I just wish their units didn't look almost exactly the same.
Yeah.
Because there is really no way for me to tell them apart. There is no way.
Yeah, it's a challenge, and I think also, like, I print those out because they're like, it's hard for you, it's just as hard for me not to forget what they do. There's so many things going on with them. And I remember after the game, it was a pretty full game. I think we were right up to like 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
And we shook hands, we called it a day, and then you were like, after playing you for 2.5 hours, I still have no idea what your army does.
Yeah. I've had some time to think about it and to process it, because, to be fair, we had been locked up in this. We had been stuck in that room for 8 hours or so, with not very long breaks. I mean, I had that break after the game against Paul with his 7 drakes, but I was a bit fatigued because I had only slept 2 hours the night before.
Yeah.
So yeah, it really took everything that I had left to play that game. But I enjoyed it. There were some times where I was a bit salty, I feel, and I regret being that salty. But I tried to, stay optimistic. But when I think you fell down to your knees 4 times.
I remember screaming 3 times. Yes.
Yeah.
Just because of how absurd it was and how badly I needed it.
Yeah. So I remember just your magic phases from, let's say, from the 15 spells that you cast. I think I'm not overreacting when I say that only 4 of them were not a 10+, right?
Probably, yeah. It was ungodly good. I don't understand it. It'll never happen again.
Yeah, and then
Ryan can attest, I never roll well.
Yeah, because you mentioned, like, these dice usually suck for me. I'm like, okay, this will be tough for you then. And then then you start rolling. I was like, whoa, wow.
Yeah.
This is just me crying on the inside right now.
It was weird.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, I like how you worded it a while back. Like, there were some clutch moments where I really needed a spell, because that's just how my list works. As I mentioned earlier, with the Zytrek Nation, I really doubled down on my spell casting and on my unbinding power, and I just couldn't unbind your spells. Even with the +2 or even +2 and re-rolls, I usually didn't manage to unbind the spells that I wanted, and you kind of managed to unbind spells that I needed, as you said. The Lambent Light, especially the Power of Vision on 20 Wardens, was rough. Yep. Because that was my only damage dealer unit that I had left, and then you just clean it up with your dragon, or your Terrorgeist. Yep. So yeah, that was a really interesting game, and I do hope to play that again sometime, just to see what else could have happened. But I don't think it would have been a stomp either way. I don't think so.
So I think we would have seen, I don't know the outcome, but I think for turn-based, the amount of models being removed by a dragon isn't from spells, right? It's just the pure damage that it can put out. The big question mark is, do I get them in time? before they get shot off the board. And so if I have normal people rolls, I think that looks a little bit different. I'd imagine I still do a pretty decent amount of damage because, again, you got to delete 3 dragons in the meantime.
Yeah.
So while you've killed 1, the other 2 should be in position to be doing other things. Also, with the summons and, like, threatening and distracting from different angles, I think that also poses its own challenges when it comes to especially holding objectives.
Yeah. All right, cool. Right?
So one thing I wanted to comment on real quick is you were talking about like the feel bads or getting salty or whatever at tournaments. I think one of the things that's kind of like important for all of us, not us 3, but everyone that plays Warhammer, thinking about tournaments is that these are long days, as you were saying, and it's obviously competitive and all that stuff. And so going in, obviously it helps if it's a tournament like this that I think it got a friendlier atmosphere and people are being reasonable. But I think also going in with a like, I've got to pacing yourself and getting through the day or whatever. Not that this is any kind of criticism of what you were doing. I find it all the time. Like Nick and I both had a hard time at one of our tournaments not too long ago, and I it's one of the reasons I say I don't love 2-day tournaments because I think it's extra hard to pace yourself well for those. But that's the whole salty thing. Like I think at the end of the day, sometimes you just end up with a bad matchup, and I can't say how many times I've been put up against someone that I looked at their list and was like, oh, this should be a cakewalk. It should be totally easy, and then it turns out to not be at all, or I underestimated what their list is doing. Usually it doesn't go the other way though. If I know an army is powerful, I'm always just like, well, maybe I'll survive this. Like you guys going up against Paul. I think you guys kind of had high expectations for what he was going to do, and he delivered, right? So
very much so, yes.
Yeah. Which maybe, I don't know, Jonas, do you feel like you have covered everything you want to say about that game with you? Or you touched on it a little bit. Maybe that's the only thing that hasn't been covered here.
Yeah, I mean, we discussed my first game against you, Ryan, and my third game against you, Nick. So the only thing that I might add about my game against the 7 Stormdrakes is he also had a 1-drop and he won the roll-off, so he went first. And he shot his entire long strike unit into my Lord Regent, and he survived with 1 wound.
Wow.
And I think, and honestly, I probably shouldn't have, because he dealt, I think, 8 or 10 mortal wounds, plus just a normal amount of shots as well, that all inflict 2 damage. But you have to remember, in Zytrek, the Lord Regent is on a 3+ and a 4+ ward. And with Aether Courts and all-out defense and the -1 to hit, he is very tanky. That's just how it is. And when he didn't manage to kill my general in the first turn, I was kind of feeling hopeful for a second there. And then he agreed with me. I spent 7 D3 on healing that guy, and on all those rolls, I rolled a 1 or a 2. And that's a lot of heroic actions and spells from Teclis that I was dedicating to keeping my general alive. Because you might say, okay, why are you bothering with keeping the Regent alive? But the Regent is really a crucial part of my list. Not only because he's very tanky and he's really good at casting, but his greater power of his spell is crucial for the, how should I put this, the guarantee that my units are going to be useful. And then I basically expected him to be in my turn with all of his dragons in my face turn 1, and he didn't. He sent in 2 and his chariots, and he just waited with the others 4. And I was kind of shuffling about, recovering from the first turn strike and getting into position with my 20 wardens. And at that time, I already realized I need to get this double turn or I'm dead. And he was so afraid of losing that roll, because he at that point saw with Speed of Hish, I can really get my wardens up the board quickly. And he had left a small opening where I could strike out towards his dragons and his long strikes at the same time with the wardens. And although Overwatch would have definitely hurt me, I think with the right positioning with Teclis and one of my screens that was still alive, I could have dealt with that. and he also mentioned after the game was done that if he had not won that roll-off, that game would have looked very differently. I probably still would have lost, but it would have been a tight game. So we go on to round two, and he rolls for initiative and he rolls a 1. And I'm like, okay, so I have a 1 in 6 chance of not getting this. I'm using my special Lumineth dice.
Yeah, the special one being those weird oblong ones that are like cylindrical.
No, the limited edition yellow ones.
Okay.
Yeah, and obviously I rolled the 1, and he's very concentrated and focused. But at that time, he just put his hands up and he's like, yeah, okay, sorry, it's going to happen. And I was like, okay, Paul, I understand. So at the end of turn 2, the game was decided. We kept on playing, but the game was decided. The only funny thing that I would still like to impart is he charged my Sentinels in turn 2 with 2 Stormdrake Guard and a Chariot, and I only suffered 3 wounds.
Wow.
Yeah.
And those Chariots do impact hits too.
Yeah, exactly. I was so lucky with his failed rolls and so lucky with my ward rolls. So afterwards, I teleported them out with Teclis, and I dropped them next to his general, and I chose Slay the Warlord, and there was such a small chance of me actually killing that guy because they're so tanky and they have so many mortal wounds, and I just did like on the dot the amount of wounds that I needed. So afterwards, he was like, yeah, okay, you were lucky there as well. And I had to agree there. But all in all, what I liked about this tournament and all the matchups, even against, the Stormdrake Guard, I didn't feel at any point that I didn't have a chance of winning the game. There wasn't like I expected to lose from Paul, not only because his list looked strong, but because I knew his reputation and I knew he was a good player. But in all of my games, I was like, if the dice just had fallen a bit differently, or if I had not made that one mistake, I still could have won. And that's something I really appreciate about Age of Sigmar right now. That even though you're playing against, not the most optimized list, or even an army that's not been doing well like Flesh-Eater Courts, there's still a chance that you're going to take the game anyway. And I really like that about the tournament as well. Even though there were some strong lists, there was still always the option of having a close game.
Yeah, and that helps that feel bad or getting salty kind of effect too. If it can feel like it's going to go both ways. There are some armies that I feel like are really hard to solve, like Nurgle in particular. Nick and I are both kind of over Nurgle in tournament settings, at least.
Yeah,
but the Stormdrake, that Dragons list it's very swingy. It doesn't have to be. Mm-hmm. And honestly, the least swingy part of it is the long strikes, really.
Yeah.
And that's probably doing more weight than pulling more weight than per point than the dragons are.
Yeah, the thing that you don't realize is you see the dragons and you're like, okay, they're going to be my problem, and they are to some extent, but the biggest problem that they put up for you is the fact that they can get into your lines as early as they can, and you have to deal with them while the long strikes can just sit back and enjoy their time,
Yeah, well, that's just their version of Sentinels, right?
Yeah.
So you're not you get to sit back too.
Yeah. I was definitely not complaining about the sitting back, but the thing about the combination with Stormdrakes and the long strikes is that you need to deal with the Stormdrakes, and it takes a while if you've not got the immortal wound output, which I was lucky to have. But if you don't have that in your army, you're looking at 18 wounds for 2 dragons and a 3+ save. That is rough. That is hard to deal with.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's move on to some pictures and then the closing thoughts. So this was the room that we played in. I blurred out some of the faces because I didn't get the chance to ask everyone for their permission. So yeah, I thought it was kind of atmospheric with the lights and the curtains and all that stuff.
Yeah, the last tournament I went to, Legions 5, was upstairs, and this room here for the second one was definitely much better, more open, less kind of echoey, and with all that less sunlight coming in, it was also pretty nice.
Yeah, and the high ceilings help, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, this is my first time here. I enjoyed the venue a lot, and then also the bar behind it where you're standing was very clutch that I could just run over real quick.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm here yet, honestly. I was very late and I couldn't get in because the door was locked.
Yeah, oh no, that's Lawrence. Sorry. No, you might not be. Actually, aren't you? Isn't that you in the back with the blue sweater behind Lawrence?
No, that's Paul.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's Paul.
That's Paul. I don't think I'm there yet.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, we were second to last, so.
Yeah, but he was actually sleeping in his car, right?
Yeah, I had gotten there way too early, so I figured I would take a nap in my car.
Really?
And I'm used to these things not starting until like a couple minutes before. Like they always say they're going to do the registration and then the introduction, and I was like, I'll skip that part and I'll just show up right at the dot. And then I didn't realize everyone was going to be there.
Yeah.
So I saw some guy carrying his models like right when I woke up, like halfway awake, and I'm like, oh, I guess it's time. And I waddled over there and I can't get inside.
Nice.
Yeah. So I am showing some pictures. This is from a practice game that you two played because I didn't manage to snap pictures from both of your armies, or I didn't remember to. So this is Ryan's force with Tekles and the Stormdrake Guard, and this is a picture of your 3 Terrorgeists.
And this is Nick's great board too.
Yeah. And the Charnel Throne.
Yes, that's the infamous piece that I left at home. I even walked in my studio and I was like, okay, I got everything, right? And I look right at it, I'm like, yep, good to go, and I walk right out. And then there's those little bits of paper that you were talking about because I can't remember everything, so I just put it next to my guys.
Yeah. Then I took this picture before we left for the tournament, so that was my army. If you want to, if you're interested in more close-ups for this army, they are in the hobby channel for the Discord. So everyone that's listening or watching this, if you're interested, go take a look there. Then we have some close-ups of the games that you were playing playing. This is you charging in with your Terrorgeists into 20 Blood Warriors, I think.
Yes, this was actually a failed charge. So yes, between me and my opponent, we agreed the steps would be a 3-incher, and couldn't manage to pull it off. It was quite disappointing. So I hung out there for a little bit. But yeah, I thought it was a great action pose. You can see the other Terrorgeists in the back being menacing over there.
Yeah.
This was, and this scenery was placed like almost after the fact, and so I was just soaring over all of this. It helped a lot.
Yeah.
But wait, you know who else is being menacing in this photo in the back is Jonas sitting right there.
I was just gonna mention that was my face when I was getting pummeled by Paul. I was like, yeah, give it to me, Paul. Come on. Yeah. I really enjoyed the tables in this tournament. By the way, there was the terrain was very thematic and well painted. I think they did a really good job at dividing up the tables and not making too many open spaces or allowing for too many open spaces. The only thing that I would put as a criticism is that I just hate this specific piece of terrain, and that's not something that they did, but just
the stairs.
Good God, I hate it.
Yeah, it was a challenge. I'll second that though. The terrain was really great, well painted. I loved their double realm gate that was on your guys' table for the first game. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I have a picture of that as well. Yeah, the only thing that I was surprised by was the third game that we played, Nick. We were playing around a volcano, and in all my other games there was a huge amount of mystical terrain, and here it was basically don't walk next to the volcano because it's deadly, but all the rest was fair game.
That's strange.
Yeah,
I guess you don't want to detract attention from an awesome volcano.
Yeah, maybe not. Yeah, maybe they could have added some more smoke just to make it just a little bit more menacing, like a smoke machine.
Yes.
Yeah. So this was the game against Soulblight for you, Ryan.
Yeah. So that Terrorgeist that's in the upper right hand corner there, or is that Zombie Dragon?
Zombie Dragon.
Yeah, that was his my failed Slay the Warlord attempt, and then he retreated back into the back right corner and then dragged my dragons back there. And then the thing is, this list looks like it doesn't have that much on the table, but then he's got 40 Graveguard.
Exactly. I was just gonna say, never underestimate the Graveguard, because I played my 2 last games that I played was playing or piloting the Soulblight, my Soulblight myself, and honestly, every time that I think I'm losing, I'm just putting the Graveguard in, and then everything dies.
Yeah.
They are so good. And especially if you got 2 blocks of 20, I did not want to deal with that, honestly.
Yeah. My star of my show, for me, like in all my games, you can see up in the front there, in front of some of the brown guys. Everyone in my army is blue and white, but my flagellants are my homeless people, and they don't get to wear cool clothes, so they have to wear rags and stuff. I've been so mean to my homeless people, and every time I was mean to them, I feel like the dice rolls ended up biting me right in the ass after saying something horrible about homeless people. It was always a joke, but I actually really enjoyed painting that unit, and I think they're really cool models.
Yeah. It was very fun to see them, because I'd never seen those models before, so that was interesting. And then here, that was your 3rd game, so against the other Lumineth player, Tim, who we already spoke about. I loved the look of this game, because just the way the terrain was set up, this looked like such an interesting game to use as Storm Drakes.
Right, and it actually looked like we were playing in Hish, which is where Settler's Gain is. So it had this cool, like, what's it called, Realm of Light kind of vibe to it.
Mm-hmm. I do have to say, though, I do not envy Tim in the regard that he had to deal with Techless. Because as Lumineth, you're so dependent on getting your spells off, and... you being able to roll unlimited unbinds and having that auto unbind and knowing what to auto unbind must have been so crippling for him.
Yeah, I think if I could give one strategic thing for him in this scenario, is it maybe just given what my predisposition was, is that he didn't realize I would have always used that auto unbind on Total Eclipse, and he never once tried to cast it.
Really?
So I ended up redirecting it to something else eventually.
Mm-hmm.
Once I realized he wasn't really that he wasn't putting much weight on it.
Yeah.
So he could have, I think, controlled the game a little bit more from a psychological perspective there if he had known my predisposition to, always choose for Total Eclipse.
Yeah. And then this was a shot from our first game.
Oh, yeah.
You can see my typical deployment here. With the castle build, and then I had to leave my Dawn Riders out on the flanks because I had to capture that or hold that objective at least against your Storm Drakes. This was interesting.
Look at how much your bodies look significantly more present there than I have.
Yeah.
I've got a notably more elite army than you have, despite us both having Techless.
Yeah, that's because your flagellants are hiding behind all those wings.
That's true.
But yeah, I agree. I had more bodies. Yeah.
What'd you say, Nick?
I was going to ask, where are they?
Yeah, well,
I see them.
They've got to clean up the dragon's poop, those homeless people. They got to earn their keep somehow.
It's true. Send them back to the Double Realm Gate.
Mm-hmm.
I kept making jokes that if they ever rolled really high run rolls, because they're like fast for humans, they're like 6 inches.
Yeah.
If they rolled really high run rolls, it was because someone offered them free food in the corner. I'm such a horrible person. I'm going straight to hell. But
you should donate to homeless people for the next 7 days, Ryan, just to atone for your sins.
Yes.
But yeah, with that, we're finishing out of the video here. Let's quickly talk about the results and future goals, maybe for your tournaments, and some closing thoughts before we round this out, because we've been going for over 2 hours now.
Yeah.
So me and Ryan, we both placed very closely to each other. I think there was only 3 points differential between us. But you, Nick, you placed 5th, which is quite good, especially for Flesh-Eater Courts, right?
Yeah, I was really surprised at how they performed, so it gives me hope that this may be a continual viable list that I'll keep playing at more tournaments until they tell me to stop.
Yeah, exactly. And Ryan, you also took home a prize, but not the one that you expected.
Well, I didn't expect to take home a prize. Let's be clear on that. I didn't. But I really like this trend that Michael's got going on. But they had this award for best army list composition, essentially, or coolest list. And this is different than best painted, right? Like, because I'm never going to win that award. But as a Johnny type player who really likes making kind of creative lists that are off meta. This one was that like it was already a feel good tournament for me, even though I only won one game, and this like just really sealed the deal for me. It just felt so cool that I could actually win something just for being willing to bring something that's off meta or whatever. And I totally was not expecting it. So I think that should be included in every tournament because the more ways you can encourage people to diversify from the meta, I think this was your point off camera or whatever, off the recording earlier, the better, right?
Yeah, I agree. One of my best friends who's my regular Age of Sigmar opponent is working on a Dwarven Alliance list with cities, Fire Slayers, and the Arcanauts.
Yeah.
And I was like, if you just bring that list to a tournament, you might not even win a game, but you are definitely taking home that prize because that's just so cool, right? And I wish that was more of a motivation even at tournaments, I think, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk future goals. After talking about this for so long, what are some things that you would like to achieve in the future, or maybe some change that you would like to do? Like Ryan, you mentioned taking out the dragons and putting in some more sentinels. Nick, you mentioned trying to be more successful or even more successful with the Flesh-Eater Courts. Is there anything else that you guys would like to add?
Nick?
Yeah, maybe it's maybe not adding to it, but it's tinkering with making them stronger. So I'm committed to the Flesh-Eater Courts for the time being. So just trying different combinations to see what works and what doesn't. So I'm basically attending any sort of a tournament anywhere just to get as much exposure with it as possible, to the point where I don't need those little cheat sheets. So that's really my goal, is to play without any sort of cheat sheet on this list.
Yeah. Cool.
Are you going to change your list at all?
I may swap around some spells, so I'm thinking about putting Flaming Weapon on a different dragon, and then swapping out Deranged Transformation. I don't think it's adding as much value as I need it to. So it's just slightly swapping things. I do have the other list, which is more common. I think it's like an exact copy of Bill Sousa's list, which is including the Giant, and it's all Flayer based.
Oh, yeah.
I took that one to Luxembourg tournament, and that I didn't do as well, but it was still really fun to play. But I like how we alluded to before. I think it just has more threat having 3 dragons as opposed to that, and more mortal wound output. So I think, for the future, I'm just going to keep playing this list, see how it does, and just make changes here and there.
Yeah, you definitely should. I can't really think of a list that would have an easy time dealing with your list, except for Nurgle.
Yeah, that's the one that I'm excited to see how they do, just because they've got the ward and they've got the bravery. So I've got challenges there quite a bit. So I want to see how that matches up.
Yeah, Nick and I are going to a tournament in MacLeod coming up, a doubles tournament where he's bringing his Flesh-Eater Courts and I'm bringing a Stormcast, a small elite Stormcast thing. And our joke is that the theme of the army is that his Flesh-Eaters, who's your general?
The Ghoul King on Terrorgeist.
That he's delusionally thinking that he is Sigmar himself, riding Dracoth. And then my Stormcast are just like, okay, dude, whatever. We're gonna hang out here while you go eat people. We're okay.
Yeah, they're taking care of it for us, so let's just follow them.
Yeah,
right.
I love it. All right. I think my future goals are, well, it's a bit twofold for me personally. I kind of want to try out a different army as well, because I play Sylvaneth and Soulblight, and I feel like Sylvaneth really needs its time in the sun again. But I am, just as Nick mentioned, I'm waiting for a new book. But I also still want to keep on using the Lumineth in a way that is not overly obvious. I think I played a somewhat obvious or even pretty obvious list. But then with the Stone Guard and on only 20 Sentinels in the block of 20 Wardens, it's still a twist. And I would like to dive into that twist a bit more and try different lists. So that's one of my goals. Is there anything else you guys want to add as closing thoughts?
No, I think I just had a great time there and looking forward to more.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this was fun too. And Nick, I really do think it's good that you were able to be a part of this because you're such a crucial part of all three of us playing. You guys both played Paul. We've all played each other's lists. I thought this was really informative and cool, like getting to chat Warhammer for a couple hours.
Yeah, I definitely agree there. You went into this a bit stressed, I think, Nick, but honestly, I appreciate your input so much, and I really enjoyed the chat that I had with both of you. And if the new Sylvanet book comes out, we definitely need to have another chat again, Nick.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, this was a lot of fun. I'm happy to be a part of it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it went on for a long time, but honestly, it just feels like a normal chat that we're recording. I do hope that the viewers enjoyed it as much as I did. So with that, let's close out the video. I would like to thank everyone for watching. If you liked it, please feel free to like, share, and subscribe. Maybe even leave a comment if you have questions for our guests. I know that Ryan's really quick in replies, and that he always replies to any questions that are left in the comments. If there's anything that you like about this kind of format and this long kind of talks even, please do let me know as well, because I would like to do more of these, but I also find that maybe listening to 2 hours of this is a bit too long for certain listeners or viewers even. And you know, just leaving a comment and a like would get us more noticed by the YouTube algorithm. And if you're interested in following more and in talking about it with us, please do join a Discord, because that's where the discussion will continue. So thanks again to my 2 amazing guests and great players as well. I really enjoyed this, both the tournament and the talk. So thank you.